It appears that we are streaming live now, so we're ready to go anytime you are.
Excellent. Then I will get us started. I see my clock just ticked over to 6 o'clock. And I welcome all of you and those of the public to the traditional territories of the Coast Salish people, on whose territory we are blessed to share and live and work and play. There are 3 things that I need to remind everyone we cannot hear input on, and that is the bylaw 1840 for retail cannabis on Goldstream, the bylaw 1700-04, the Royal Beach sub-area plan, and bylaw 1837, the Royal Beach zone, and also bylaw 1852, the land use amendment for 1764 Island Highway. And I'm going to start, if everybody could unmute, and we will just run through the roll call. Councillor Parkinson.
I'm present.
Excellent. Councillor Baxter.
Present.
Councillor Jansen.
I'm here, thank you.
All right. Councillor Kobayashi.
Ready, ready.
Okay. Councillor Logan. I think Councillor Logan did mention he might be joining us a little late. Work is crazy for him. And Mayor Martin.
Present.
Excellent. So all present except for Councillor Logan. So we are moving on tonight. Amanda, do we have any presentations for public participation?
We do not. We have not received any written submissions or anybody registered to speak.
Excellent. All right. Well, not excellent, but well done that we know. We have no correspondence to receive. Then we are back to our 2021 to 2025 draft financial plan. We are taking up where we left off, which was, I believe we were looking at public works. And I'm just going to find that page number. Sorry, everybody, crazy day running. Jen, would you like to lead us along?
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Councillor Day. Just bear with me and I'll pull up the presentation. And so you are very correct. We did leave off just at the initiation of the Public Works Service Plan Review. And just before we jump into that, I wanted to take a moment. So on the screen before you is a bit of a summary of what we've reviewed to date. And so budget deliberations, we have 2 more special committee of the whole meetings scheduled. We have tonight, and then we have Tuesday, March 16th at 6 p.m. The remaining portions of the draft financial plan that we have yet to review include the following service plans: public works, roads, parks and trails, boulevards, storm sewers, sewer utility. We also have the recreation, culture and heritage service plan to review. And then we have the city's capital program to review. And following the capital program, in conjunction, we'll be having a discussion over the city's projected reserve balances. So looking at what is driving our transfers to and our transfers from reserves. And then we'll have an opportunity to have a recap, a wrap up of the budget in its entirety. And so what staff are really looking for is we need to have any recommended changes with this schedule by the end of the meeting on March 16th. And we will then incorporate those changes into the draft financial plan document and the accompanying draft financial plan bylaw that is scheduled to come forth on April 12th. Should committee make any recommended changes tonight, those will be incorporated into the documentation that will be published for the March 16th meeting. Otherwise, we'll proceed with the documentation as is, and we'll look for those recommendations on March 16th. Was there any questions at all with respect to the timeline before us?
Just, Jen, if I could just ask, I had asked for a reminder of what our reserve funds were and what their intended purpose was. Is that
Yes.
tonight or not till March 16th?
I will comment on that tonight. I didn't highlight it on this slide here, but I do have a slide to give us a bit of an opportunity, primarily so I can give a little bit of a backgrounder on what the restrictions are with respect to our various funding balances. In terms of the specifics of the balances in those funds, I can comment on that at a high level, but that detail will be presented on the 16th.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right, so without further ado, we'll get into the Public Works Service Plan. And I just wanted to take a minute and highlight the progression that we've made in this particular area of our service delivery. And it's particularly important because this is the area where we have seen the most change, certainly in terms of how we're interpreting the budget needs to support the service delivery. So 2 financial plans ago, we had a single service area and 3 defined operating budgets. More or less the majority of the operating rolled up into a single line item referred to as Public Works, Parks and Trails. As we've progressed, particularly with this past fall, we have disaggregated that information to create 5 distinct service areas with 5 distinct operating budgets to support each of those areas. And you were first introduced to those with this fall's service review. And based on the changes that we heard, whether it was to maintain service delivery or increase service delivery, we've incorporated the financial implications based on our recommendations, and we'll be going through that in detail tonight. And so what you have before you in this draft financial plan is 24 defined operating budgets. And I want to highlight this because there are implications for us to consider. Finance and Public Works have worked incredibly closely in moving forward with these proposed budgets. But we have to recognize that our historical information wasn't necessarily tracked to the same level of detail. So we've put together, we've more or less remapped some of this information, which is why you see those statements on the draft plan about prior period information may be restated to ensure that we have pulled over our relevant historical information. But I do highlight that because as we move forward out of this budget, we will be working, we've introduced additional GL accounts to track this information. We'll be further refining, in particular, our pay codes that our team uses to further track their time. And so I highlight that to keep in mind as we move into this review. And so the first service plan is that of Public Works. And so this primarily represents the administration costs for the team, the facilities maintenance work that's done on behalf of the organization, as well as a number of city programs. So we've got our snow and ice and our storm cleanup, our branch drop off, our spring cleanup, as well as city event support, and emergency response. And so as we take a minute to have a look through this budget, and I'll start by commenting on the direct funding related. So we do collect some facilities rental or lease revenue, primarily related to our St. John's Church and Emery Hall facility. We did see an impact to that revenue. It did drop in 2020. To the tune of about $20,000 below what we typically collect there. We have utilized the COVID grant funding to make up for that difference. And when it comes to the city's activity with respect to the St. John's Church, we do have a reserve fund bylaw in place that ultimately directs that any excess revenues that don't directly support utility costs for that facility, we do to set those aside into reserves for specific purposes. primarily infrastructure works relating to that facility. Spring cleanup revenue represents the fees that are typically collected. As you know, we didn't hold a spring cleanup event in 2020. And moving into 2021, the draft budget before you does not propose any fee budget for 2021. Should the city hold a spring cleanup event, we are proposing that we would not collect fees this year. Specifically, we would not be handling cash. And again, we would utilize the COVID grant funding to make up that shortfall in the operating budget. And then lastly, with respect to the emergency response, which I'll get to in a moment, but all of the costs that are directly associated as we continue, primarily with our enhanced cleaning measures, both for our fleet and our facilities, as well as enhanced washroom facility maintenance, those incremental costs are proposed to be funded through the COVID grant. And so as we move into the operating expenses for this area, the primary driver, the reason that we came in over budget in 2020, this is where the city centralized all of our COVID response costs, with the exception of staffing costs that occurred elsewhere in the organization. So for example, the fire rescues increased staffing costs, those were reported against the fire's operating budget. But all of our hard costs, our supplies, those were reported here. And as I commented on yesterday, those costs have either been recovered through Emergency Management BC, or we've utilized our COVID grant to fund those. Moving into 2021 and partially into 2022, we are looking and we have included a budget with the expectation that we will need to maintain those enhanced services. And so we have utilized the COVID grant. Right now, our expectation, it'll be similar activity to what we incurred in 2020 this year. And then we've estimated at a 50% level for financial planning purposes for 2022. The spring cleanup budget has been reinstated in the draft financial plan, and I highlight this, and sorry, I shouldn't probably use the word reinstated. We didn't actualize in 2020, but what I do want to highlight is that if the city does move forward with this event this year, something to consider is there may be increased activity, and so this budget may not be sufficient. And so we would propose that we would increase that, and again, the impact of increasing that for potential increased activity in 2021 would be funded through the COVID grant. And so as you can see below, the budgets to increase service levels in this area, both emergency response and an enhancement to our branch drop-off, so moving to a weekly schedule. Public Works can correct me. I believe it's enhanced weekly drop-off between this spring and then into the fall. But we are proposing utilization of the grant for that, so that does not have a taxation impact. The implication to keep in mind is in future years, should we wish to continue with an increased branch drop-off service, we will have to return with the financial implications of that.
Jen, I have a couple questions for you. Councillor Jansen.
Thank you. I appreciate all that, Jen. I think you might have already answered it, but I saw the line for 2021 branch drop off. It was actually it appears that it's only 129,000, and yet our actual expense for 2020 was 170 plus. So is that shortfall made up for with the grant like you suggested, or am I misinterpreting something there?
No, thank you for highlighting that, Councillor Jansen. So in 2020, the city did move forth and offer enhanced branch drop-off. So we did increase the frequency of our events, and we utilized our spring cleanup budget to fund that increase in service. Again, we weren't aware of grant funding until late last year. So moving into 2021, that core budget there represents the estimated costs of, if we were to continue branch drop off at our typical service delivery number, 24 events.
Okay.
And then the below is the increased funding that would be required to increase the number of events.
Okay, I get that. Thanks. And the, I mean, I hate to say it, and I just throw this out there that, you know, I think offering a sort of a free for all for dumping your garbage, you know, might be, I mean, I think everybody expects to pay something. So, I mean, I don't think it would be too much to ask. And I'm not sure about this reticence for cash handling. It seems like most eateries and that are collecting cash. Like, do we not have a tap payment method? Like, for instance, the liquor store does?
We don't currently. So we did explore that about 2 years ago to getting that set up over in the Public Works yard. And at that time, it wasn't possible. And so we have been to date handling cash. Since last spring, City Hall, we have not physically handled cash. And so it is an implication to consider for this year.
So I'll leave that thought with you guys. And I love the idea that we're going to have a day or two where people can dump stuff so that it stays out of the vacant lots and parks and stuff. So that's awesome. Sorry, that's it for now. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Jensen. Mayor Martin also has a question.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So sorry, Jen, can you step back for me again and explain to me where do I see the COVID funding, and where is the council decision on us choosing to fund? So, for example, you know, we talk about enhanced branch drop off. We budgeted 105 for next year. We're budgeting 129. We expect we're going to be spending more than that. But where in this process are we looking at COVID funding and approving those? Is that from last night when on page 5, or at where are we doing that process?
Thank you, Mayor Martin. Yes, so last night I provided a summary of how the COVID grant funding is proposed to be utilized. So that summary ultimately pulled together all the proposed uses. So both for operating, supporting programs, supporting, you know, enhanced cleaning measures, supporting the needs for supplies, and then also towards some capital infrastructure costs. So that summary was presented last night.
Right, and I'm looking at it, in page 28 right now, but it's difficult for me to be able to cross-reference and to understand the numbers. Like, you know, if I was looking at this number, for example, I'm staying on with branch drop-off, we budgeted $129,000. I would expect that that's what we're spending, but I know we're not spending that. So how do I know what the actual budget number is for 2021 for the enhanced branch drop-off?
So if branch drop-off moves forward at the enhanced level, the total budget required would be the 128,900 plus the 111,600.
Right, which I see lower down, but is that the only place I would know that? Yeah, within this document?
That it's funded, that it's proposed to be funded through the COVID grant?
Correct.
Correct. It would be with the summary information that was just presented in the slide deck last night. And then as we go through each service area, as I'm highlighting how the grant funding is being utilized. And I can certainly return at the next budget meeting with a detail that clearly shows, you know, each of whether it's going towards operating expenditures or capital, and have a more comprehensive summary pulled together.
Okay, because thank you. Because one of my concerns is not about this year, but about next year. and about trying to go through this budget process where I look like I go, okay, I budgeted 129 and we spent 236. How is that going to be recorded that it doesn't look weird to me? That's just my concern. So yeah, I'll have a look at that. Can I get somebody from Public Works or maybe Jen, if you would like to comment on that? Looking at the maintain park and ride EV charger number, we budgeted 11.9. We only spent 35, but we increased it to 72. And I'm just wondering why we spent so little and why we still think it needs to be double what we spent.
I see Brent Molnar has put up his hand. He maybe has that answer.
Thank you very much. Through the chair to Mayor Martin, we did not end up replacing the charger at the park and ride facility last year. Hydro ended up doing it on behalf of their improvement project. And that may be the reason for it. So we've got it probably tabled still, open to others to suggest comments.
And what I will add to that comment there is historically, we were actualizing much higher hydro usage, and that has since changed. And my notes on that was with the addition of another EV charger within that vicinity that dropped the usage down.
Okay, thank you. And my apologies, because I don't think you've got to this section yet, but we started asking questions, so I'm just going to ask it. Under the line that says budget to increase service levels, the first line is maintain Public Works yard washroom facility for $15,000. And maybe it's the word maintain. It is throwing me off on that. So maybe somebody could just remind me what we're doing for $15,000 to maintain a washroom.
Absolutely, thank you. And this is somewhat of an anomaly, but when we get into the capital program, we are looking at a temporary washroom facility, a trailer facility, and that will require contracted septic pumping to support that infrastructure, and that's the cost there. And it's being included as a core operating cost. It could be finite. But it has been included as an ongoing core operating cost.
So sorry, can I just, through the chair, can I just get a clarification? Does the Public Works building presently have a washroom? Like I'm trying to understand why we need this facility. Is it COVID related? Is it that our washroom has stopped working? Is it?
Mr. Earl has his hand up.
Through the chair, thank you, Mayor Martin. And the reason for this washroom is in large part due to COVID, but also due to the aging washroom facilities of Public Works. And so it's become a necessity that we find another option for washrooms.
So just as a quick follow-up to this, and this will be, I promise, will be the last, Chair. So, sorry, is this a short-term issue or is this a long-term issue? Like, is this actually a COVID issue, or is this going to be an issue after COVID is done?
This is a bit of both. It's an issue that's been exacerbated by COVID and physical distancing, but it's also enabled us to realize that there will be improvements needed in the future to accommodate our staff.
And are we working towards that solution?
Yes, there is a plan. This is a stopgap, mostly due to COVID.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Next, I have Councillor Kobayashi.
Thank you very much, Chair. Through the chair to Jen again. Jen, could you just explain this emergency response number again to me? You know, we actually spent 270,000, yet the budget was 29, and then we have an increase to 339.9 on top of the 29 for this year. Can you just explain that, the dynamics of that again to me?
Absolutely. So when we look at the 2020 actuals, included within that is close to $100,000 because these actuals were prepared a couple of weeks ago. So before we got our year-end accruals in for our emergency management recovery. But so included in that is the public works labor, salary and benefits related to the COVID response efforts. So primarily the enhanced cleaning, also in particular in 2020, we had, parks closing, opening, all of the city's hard costs, so all of our supplies, that sort of thing, that all got coded here. And then moving forward, and sorry, I should also highlight that we had the need to increase our fleet to support physical distancing measures as well. And so that temporary increase, we've been leasing some fleet. And so those costs are in here as well. And so moving forward, where in 2020, we utilized existing workforce for purposes of those efforts. Moving into 2021, we are budgeting to staff with additional staff to support that so that we don't pull existing workforce from other service delivery. And so that's what's driving that $339,000.
Thank you very much. Yeah, no, that's clear now. I just didn't get it all, but now I understand. Okay, thank you.
And next I have Councillor Parkinson.
Yeah, I'll be quick here. I think I've got this. So essentially, Jen, the budget's proposed to increase by 1.9% plus the $15,000 for the washroom facility. And then the other items of increased service levels would be contract against the COVID grant. So wouldn't no concern about them going forward. So that really, if this was a normal year, we'd be looking at 1.9% plus $15,000. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah. And so we've increased our emergency response budget for 2021 and into 2022. And of course, much like everything COVID related, we continue to monitor the impacts and we'll see and continue to report back. And then as we head into this fall, we'll as well look at, what the anticipated impact is moving into next year and beyond.
But what we're seeing in this budget for expenses to be offset against the COVID grant is expected to cover, I guess nobody knows how long this is going to go on, but it's, you say you've looked at it into next year too. So in your opinion, the COVID grant has been dispersed throughout here and will be all spent, but we won't have ongoing expenses beyond the COVID grant. Is that your belief?
Yes. So the one implication to consider is the increased branch drop off. And so as we move into next year, if we choose to maintain that increased level of service, and staff, we've had some of these conversations already, looking at how we're structuring our staffing for purposes of that service delivery to understand the financial implications moving beyond utilization of the COVID grant.
Gotcha.
Should that be a desire to keep that increased level of service on into perpetuity.
Yep, good. Okay, well, we can grapple with that decision probably at a later date. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to interrupt our flow here just for a moment because I realize as chair, I made an error. I forgot to ask for a mover for approval of the agenda. Could I ask for someone to move approval of the agenda? I see Councillor Johnson has moved that. Is anyone in opposition? Councillor Parkinson, are you opposing adopting the agenda?
No, I'm just fumbling, lowering my hand after putting it up to move.
Okay, no problem. I got you. Great. So Councillor Jansen has moved it. No one is opposed. We will go right back to our agenda. I did have a hand from Mr. Earl. Were you still wishing to speak, Mr. Earl?
Sorry, no, I forgot to lower my hand.
No problem. Great. Okay, onwards. Director of Finance, over to you.
Thank you very much. So if there's no further questions or discussions in this area, we will move to the next.
I just have one question for you because maybe I'm slow and I was managing messages at the same time you were talking about it. I don't quite understand the budget to increase service levels. Is that the COVID grant?
Thank you very much. That is primarily utilization of the COVID grant, with the exception of the increased maintenance costs for the proposed new public works washroom facility. So the
Okay.
emergency response and the enhanced branch drop-off is proposed to be funded through utilization of the COVID grant.
Great. And just in listening to the conversation about the public works yard washroom facility, my sense is around the table that maybe members would like to understand that a little better. So I'm just suggesting it doesn't have to be tonight, but could more information be provided to council on why this choice and kind of describe for us the long-term thinking that this is the short-term solution to. Oh, I see Mayor Martin.
Thank you, Chair. So sorry, just before we move on, just so that I understand this correctly, because I'm still trying to understand the funding model around the COVID. If I'm looking at revenues now and the budgeted revenue, the facility operating, we have revenue of $451,500. That is COVID funding through the Safe Restart. Is that correct? Am I interpreting that correctly?
Sorry, that revenue there is funding to support the increased branch drop-off and the enhanced emergency response efforts, that 451,000.
Right, no, sorry, I'm sorry, thank you, Jen. No, I meant more from a source standpoint. So when I'm looking at it from a revenue standpoint, it's listed under Public Works Department operating budget revenue for 2021 under facilitating operating 45150. That's COVID funding, correct?
That's correct.
So why is 45150? And then when I go down to budget increase, the budget increase are not just COVID? Because it's 46650. So like, why do those two numbers not match?
Thank you very much. The necessary increased funding that's required to maintain existing branch drop-off service delivery, we are also proposing utilization of the grant revenue for that. Specifically, we have to ensure physical distancing measures are in place. So we have incurred, whether or not we offer 24 events or 45, with the core increase in branch drop-off, we're also proposing utilization of the grant for that.
Right. So sorry, Jen, but what I guess my question, and I'm asking the question poorly. It is not your answer. What I'm trying to understand is the last three line items for budget or for 2021, which is the maintain public works yard washroom facility, emergency response, and branch drop off. Those three numbers are all COVID number, are all Safe Restart funding numbers, correct? Or they're not? Am I mixing apples and oranges?
I'm sorry. We are utilizing the COVID grant to fund a number of expenditures. And so in this instance, it's funding our enhanced emergency response, and it's funding our enhanced branch drop-off.
Right. But I guess what I'm struggling with, and I understand exactly what you're saying, Jen, but it seems like that would be $466,500.
No, sorry, and I maybe commented on it too quickly. The increased maintenance for the Public Works washroom facility. The budget right now does not propose the utilization of the COVID
Oh, okay,
safe
thank you.
restart.
There, that's where I didn't understand. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Excellent. Next, I have the Chief Administrative Officer.
Thank you, Chair Jay. I just wanted to comment that during the capital budget discussion, there will be an opportunity for committee to better understand both the short and the long-term plan with respect to facilities. We have two potential short-term facilities and then a long-term plan that is all in the capital plan. Some of it COVID funded and some of it will need to be traditionally or taxpayer funded. All of that will become more clear during the capital budget.
Great, thank you. And next I have Councillor Jansen.
Sorry, I'll be quick. Jen, I would find it helpful if you put an asterisk or some kind of representation that indicates it's coming from that COVID fund. And that might help with the mayor's trying to interpret this as well.
Certainly. Yeah, we can absolutely make that change in a subsequent version of this document. That's no problem.
Excellent. I think we're ready to move on, Jen.
Great, thank you very much. So moving into the next service plan, this is for the city's roads maintenance services. So coming out of the Fall's service review recommendation, we heard to maintain our asphalt maintenance, our line marking works, and our road shouldering services. And staff received direction to consider increasing the bike lane maintenance. And so the draft budget before you, the primary drivers for the core budget increase is to ensure that we have sufficient core funding for purposes of our existing service delivery. If we have a look at where we actualized in 2020, that in large part has driven what we have proposed as the funding requirements for maintaining this service delivery. And then moving into the budget to increase the service levels, the financial implications there, just shy of $30,000. That's primarily related to increased street sweeping services on the more popular cycling routes.
Councillor Parkinson has a question.
Yeah, so I think I remember our discussions on these. So sidewalk maintenance going from essentially $20,000 to $40,000. Could I assume that relates to more snow plowing of sidewalks? And then just wondering kind of the difference, and it's just semantics, I guess, but sidewalk maintenance goes up by $20,000, and yet the budget to increase service levels is bike lane service increase is $30,000. It's just recorded separately. I guess I'm not following that, but is that what we're doing with both of them? The sidewalk maintenance goes up for more snow clearing, and the bike lane is just more bike lane cleaning?
Mr. Earl, I think, wants to answer.
Hello, through the chair, it's Rob Boyle, Public Works Manager. The increase to the sidewalk maintenance is to address the trip hazards we've encountered primarily in our existing sidewalks through the Royal Bay area due to our boulevard trees. And this is a option to mitigate that. And that's what the increase is for. It's not for snow clearing, sorry. And in a comment to the increased service for bike lanes, that is street sweeping cleaning for the bike lanes and an increased frequency for that as well.
Thank you. So, sorry if I may, Madam Chair.
Yes.
The increased sidewalk maintenance, do we believe that's sort of the go forward budget in future years, or is this a sort of a one-time thing to address a bunch of issues?
It's a good guess. It's start off with a fair chunk, try to get addressed to it, and then mitigate it as we go forward. It's not, we're not going to use it if we don't need it. it's what we're going to have to do. It's just, we've come into a crux. We have trees that we want to keep and sidewalks that don't like the trees beside them. So we're trying to address that issue.
Understood. Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm done.
Great. Next, I have Councillor Baxter with a question. Mr. Unmute.
Thank you for the reminder. I wanted to pick up on the snow clearing. And so this question is for Rob Boyle. We don't in fact clear snow every year, do we? That's just my memory, but.
Through the chair to Councillor Baxter, my history so far is that we've cleared snow almost every year. The events have just been sort of shortened.
Okay, so the amount of money spent on that varies greatly. How is that currently budgeted?
I'll just jump back to the previous slide. The snow clearing budget is included within the snow storm cleanup line item there.
Okay, and I would assume that that is not allocated as to where, because when you get a snowfall like we just did, you're probably spending most of your time cleaning bus routes and hoping it'll stop at first, and then you catch up with the rest later. So I'm guessing you probably can't have strict allocations as to what you're cleaning up, you know, whether it's sidewalks or bike lanes or whatever.
We currently do maintain a separate budget for snow and ice response efforts versus storm cleanup efforts. And when I look at the detail we're looking at for snow and ice, we actualized $155,000 in costs in 2019. And in 2020, it was $145,000 approximately. So certainly.
Sorry, the point I was trying to elicit was that we don't have separate snow clearing for sidewalks, separate snow clearing for roads.
That is correct. We have a single snow and ice response budget.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much.
Next, I have Mayor Martin.
Thank you. I have two quick questions. One, in the 2020 budget, comparing budget to actuals, we overspent on almost every line item, and I'm wondering about the confidence level of us staying within the budget for 2021. How realistic is that?
Thank you very much. I'll defer to the Public Works team for specifics. In part, you know, this budget was increased to support what we expect to actualize in 2021.
And thank you, Jen. And I will look to Public Works in a second, but I will clarify my question as well. I'm concerned that there's an escalating, a faster escalating cost, specifically, for example, around general road maintenance, in regards to, for example, Ocean Boulevard. Ocean Boulevard last year was significant potholes. I don't know how good or bad it's maintaining this year, but I'm worried about those costs escalating significantly outside of normal inflation rates. And so that I'm not implying that staff don't know how to budget. I'm concerned that costs for materials and things are escalating from a construction standpoint faster than what we clearly anticipated last year. And do we have confidence that we're predicting those numbers correctly?
Hello, through the chair to Mayor Martin. It's Rob Boyle again, Public Works Manager. I would love to say that I'm 100% confident in our projection for the budget, but as Jen mentioned at the beginning, we are separating our budgets out. We have allocated, when we do the maintenance, we use funds for, we can't do two things at the same time. Our crews, we just don't have enough crew for it. So if we're doing road maintenance, we're not doing storm management or stuff like that. So that's why the budget, it is projection. And yes, I appreciate the fact that you may have concerns, and we will endeavor to finalize or refine our future projections as we move forward with proper, and I can't say accounting because that gets Jen upset. So I'll say transparency of where our funds are going.
Thank you. Yeah, and I guess I do want to be clear with everybody. I wasn't suggesting that we weren't budgeting properly. It's just that there are factors outside of our control, and so that I think we need to have some flexibility. Can I have someone please just quickly comment on the general maintenance, road maintenance of Ocean Boulevard, and how much that costs us a year? Is Ocean our single most costly road? That's a question.
Through the chair, Mayor Martin, I couldn't say that Ocean Boulevard was our single most costly. In 2020, it was. We put a certain funds into it because it was one of our aged roads and it was failing, and we tried to extend its base life. That's what we're doing with all of our roads. It's basically following the pavement assessment plan, and we are trying to get caught up.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
And I'll recognize Mr. Molnar.
Thank you very much. Through the chair, just to add to the comments from Mr. Boyle about the fiscal cost of maintaining Ocean Boulevard. Part of those costs were considered in last night's meeting where we discussed about the engineering aspects to bridge maintenance. And those two haven't been combined. As Mr. Boyle spoke about, there was a significant amount of funds spent on the repair for Ocean Boulevard this year, but the true cost of maintaining that road includes the bridge, which is part of a regular maintenance regime that we've had studied over the course of time. And that was considered in last night's meeting. Thank you.
Okay, back to you, Ms. Hupting.
Thank you very much. If there's no further questions or comments with respect to roads, we'll move to parks and trails.
I'm not seeing any hands, so seems like the plan.
All right, so what we heard during the service review in this area was to increase parks maintenance, to maintain parks beautification, to increase our trails maintenance, to increase our urban forestry maintenance, and to increase our invasive species maintenance. And so the budget before you interprets the financial implications of how staff have proposed we increase those services. And I'll comment on those from a high level, and then certainly we have our public works team here to articulate in further detail. And so first I will highlight the primary reason we came in under budget in this area was we did increase the budget starting in 2020 for the increased maintenance that we anticipate with Meadow Park, the Royal Bay Latoria North Park coming online, being turned over to the city for maintenance responsibility, and that didn't actualize in 2020. That is just actualizing now in 2021. So that's the primary reason, and also consideration as well, just for the COVID response efforts. And so moving into the increased services, the infrastructure related to Royal Bay, we had proposed to phase that in. And so what you're seeing there, that $111,000, that's the remaining portion that was previously approved. So when we spoke last night about a number of factors driving the 4% property tax increase, this here is one of those factors. And ultimately, the combined effect of the increased budget is funding for 4 seasonal auxiliary equivalents to service, as well as the increased supplies and particularly utilities, the increased watering that will incur in that area. And so that's previously approved. Our responsibility is a result of the increased infrastructure. And then moving in to the increased parks maintenance services, what you see before you is a representation of a 25% increase in dedicated hours in the first year. And the budget proposes that we increase that to a 50% increase in dedicated park maintenance hours in year 2. And with invasive plant management in increasing our service in that area, we're proposing the increase in the equivalent of a 0.5 seasonal laborer there. And that increase would be closer to approximately $40,000, but it has been offset by an internal reallocation of $5,000 from the core budget. Increased trail maintenance, we're proposing a mid-year hire, then moving to a full FTE equivalent in 2022 for purposes of increasing the service in that area. And increased urban forestry trails. I'll have to get the Public Works team to articulate on the specifics of that. But it does include some supply budgets in that area. I believe some tree planting works.
It does. This is Gord Bavillier, Foreman of Parks. Thanks, Jen. And that is for trees and planting trees.
Thank you, Gord.
You're welcome.
I have a question for you myself, and then we also have Councillor Parkinson. I'll call on Councillor Parkinson in just a moment. I'm just wondering, there's 2 items in there where you show the increased service levels. The first one is the parks maintenance. And I'm just confused by the way the numbers are laid out, Ms. Hupting. We have 80,300 in the 21 budget, and then the percent change is at 81,800. So where is that $1,500? What's that all about?
Oh, the difference there is just primarily related to the anticipated increase in salary and labor and benefits in year 2.
Okay, so that's represented in the percent change.
That's represented in the reason that you're not seeing the exact same dollar figure, 80,300 in year 1 and 80,300 in year 2. The difference in year 2 is simply to increase the funding for the expected increase in the salary and benefit rates.
Okay, I guess what's confusing me is the heading, because we're talking about the 2021 budget and the change. It doesn't have the next year budget at the top. Is that an error?
Sorry, are we referring to the budget to increase service levels and understanding that information?
Yes.
Okay.
So in the report that I'm looking at on page 71, it looks exactly like your slide, but at the top of that column, it doesn't say 2022, it says percent change.
Absolutely. I could certainly do to split those charts out a little more. So as you read the core operating budget, we are looking at the percentage change and the dollar change. The intention of the information pertaining to the budget to increase service levels is to highlight the incremental cost of increasing that service level. And for a number of these increases, we are proposing what we're referring to as a phase in. So where we may, increase maintenance hours by 25% in year 1, and then we'll again increase in year 2. So that's the intention of that second portion of the chart there.
Okay, that's perfect. Thank you. I see the second heading now. I missed it. Councillor Parkinson, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So I remember our service review discussions, and I remember supporting all the things that are in this budget and still support all the things in this budget. But I think last night, Jen, you had a number, I think it was $150,000 was a 1% tax increase. And here we're looking at 276. So essentially 2% of our tax increase is for all these services that we've asked for in the Parks and Trails operating budget. I got that correct? And I guess another 1% in 2022 already.
Yes, you have that understanding correct. And so to be very specific in this area, the increased servicing required for the increased infrastructure, that was what we referred to as a previously approved service increase, and that was factored into overall the 4%. The remaining increases, increased parks maintenance, trails maintenance, the invasive plant, and the urban forest, those are new considerations of the financial implications coming from what we heard this past fall. But you are correct. Those are all driving the tax increase.
So, as I said, I supported them then. I support them now. I'm scared of a big tax increase. Will we, in our process, at some point, we'll go through this. Maybe we'll find some savings somewhere, or maybe we won't, and then sit back and say, okay, here's where the tax increases are coming from. Are we sure? Will there be an opportunity to do that sort of globally, or is it only when we get to these specific items that we should be talking about that?
Certainly there will be an opportunity. So as you know, as last night I spent some time talking on a global scale, about what was driving the change in our taxation 2021 versus 2020. I will certainly return to that at the March 16th meeting. And if, what is very helpful, if at any time, committee wishes for staff to return with alternatives and the financial implications of alternatives, please provide us with that direction, and we can return with that information. And then committee will have an opportunity to see how that will impact the draft budget information and the draft tax increase.
Thank you. And I'm not sort of prepared to throw out a knee-jerk, let's change this or that at this moment. I know that this is one of the things that I'm going to have to struggle with at the same time I struggle with what tax increase is appropriate. So, but I don't have anything to request at this point.
Thanks, Councillor Parkinson. Next, I have Councillor Kobayashi.
Thank you, Chair. Through Chair to Jen. I guess I got the same sort of sitting on the same sort of issues as Councillor Parkinson. That 7% tax increase is just hard to swallow. And but then again, and like Councillor Parkinson, I supported every one of these initiatives myself, not knowing what the costs were going to be at the time. I guess my question is, when you're presenting these numbers to us right now, are we looking at like the Volkswagen option, or are we looking at the Cadillac option? There's no sense, increasing budgets if it's not going to be effective. So I'll agree with that. So I guess my question is, is this sort of the bare minimum so that it's effective? Taxpayers' dollars are being used effectively, or is this sort of the maybe the Cadillac solution? I don't know. It's just a question that I have for you, a generic question.
I'll recognize Mr. Earl.
Hello, through the chair to Councillor Kobayashi. It's Gord Bouvillier, the Parks Foreman again. There will be opportunity when we get into these discussions on the service levels to see the various options that we have presented for council. And it's my understanding, and Jen can correct me here, I think these are would be the full asks, but there will be opportunity to see other options in those presentations.
Oh, that's great. That's the answer I was hoping to hear. Thanks, Gord.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I think sorry, Councillor Day, I was just to comment. So I think one thing to consider is, this is the financial implication based on how we've described it tonight. So with parks maintenance, we're looking at a 25% increase in maintenance hours. That's what this $80,000 represents. The intention is, as we continue with these service reviews, to more closely align those reviews with the subsequent budget years. With this past fall being our first service review, I certainly didn't have, the financial implications at the ready for what was being discussed during that review. And as we move forth into subsequent reviews, that will, of course, be an opportunity to understand, how things came to fruition, what the impact of that increased service level was, and ultimately, what the implications, the financial implications were to consider, as we continue onwards.
Okay, I have Councillor Baxter and then Councillor Parkinson.
I thought I understood where these increases were coming from, and now I find I have to check that understanding, having listened to the last few speakers. So my understanding is that in the fall, we had a discussion about whether we needed additional maintenance in certain areas or not. And the council indicated to staff in these parks areas in particular that we wanted additional maintenance, that the level of maintenance previous to that was not as good as we would like. And that then staff went away and put numbers to the additional levels. And that's what we're now looking at, is those numbers. And I think, as you're saying, Jen, we couldn't put the numbers to those levels during the fall meeting. We've done that now, and we may refine that in future. Is that all the way it actually happened?
That is correct, Councillor Baxter. And so, these budget deliberations right now, this is the opportunity for us to receive feedback as to whether or not how we've proposed to resource the increased services. If there's any desire for change in what we've proposed, that's what we need to hear, this month before we draft the bylaw. Alternatively, if there is support for what we have proposed, then we will move forth, ensure we have the funding in place, and we will action the increased services as we've described today.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Parkinson.
Pretty much repeating, I think, what Michael just said. So my understanding is that parks have gone away and said, okay, we heard your council, here's what it's going to cost to do what you've asked to do. In this budget process, we may or may not decide to alter those numbers, but then they'd have to go away and try to work to those numbers. I don't think in the budget process, although I heard the offer of pricing out different alternatives, I suspect that within this budget process, we won't get that. We could say spend less money and they will figure out how to do that, but I don't think we'll be getting the level of detail that we got in the service review as part of the budget process. I'd probably have to wait for the next service review is my guess, but maybe I'm wrong.
And I see that I have the Chief Administrative Officer's hand up again. I'm suspecting that will be staff.
It's through the chair, it's Gord again from Parks Manager, or Parks Foreman, sorry. Getting ahead of myself there, I think. We can get into what that increase looks like if council so desires. With the 25% lift in labor for 2021 and then 25% in 2022 for parks.
Okay, I will go back to council and just ask, is there more detail wanted? I'm not seeing any hands. Anyone wanting to speak to? Oh, there's somebody. Councillor Parkinson.
I really appreciate that offer. As I've said, I think to really try to dive into the overall tax increase, I'm hoping we can keep that offer on hold, and perhaps as we get to the global, see what we're doing with taxes, we may want to come back and sort of go, gee, Gord, if we only approved, half as much, what would that look like? And could we live with that? But I think maybe not tonight would be the time to do that. Hopefully he'll be forced to sit through the rest of these meetings with the rest of us, and we can ask it at a later date.
So, Jen, perhaps you can correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding from your preamble at tonight's meeting was that we need to be prepared to make those types of determinations at the March 16th meeting. That is the drop dead date for motions to make changes to the budget. Is that correct?
That is correct based on our current schedule. We have established these as special committee of the whole meetings. If there's a desire for an additional meeting between March 16th and March 31st, that could offer up some additional time, but ultimately we do need to get these recommendations in this month in order to achieve our statutory deadline for the bylaws. So based on what we have scheduled, we do need to be prepared to make those recommendations by March 16th.
Okay, so I'm just going to make a very bold suggestion that if you want to know what it would look like from our staff who are here tonight and ready to answer your questions to the best of their ability, tonight would be the time to ask, what would that look like if we wanted to reduce that increase somewhat? Councillor Parkinson?
Okay, well, then let's ask, for instance, if we decided that the 276.6 was too much, again, that looks like it's a 2% tax increase. What would it look like if we limited that to a 1% tax increase? So a total of half of that, $130,000, $140,000. What could you do or not do with that budget?
Okay, I'll look to staff, please. Recognize the Chief Administrative Officer.
Thank you, Chair Day. And so in trying to answer the question, we do have the team here that can talk precisely or with more granularity with respect to what makes up the 80,300 in additional parks maintenance, the 35.2 in invasive plant, the 9,600 in urban forest, and the 40,200 in trail maintenance. Ms. Hepting earlier this evening spoke about the 111,300, and that's specific relative to the increased infrastructure costs that were previously committed. And so if committee would like to hear about those other 4 items, we have team members here ready to provide commentary. If you would like, for example, to understand what makes up the 80,300, and if committee was interested in a different amount of that, could that be deliverable? Would committee be interested in that type of discussion?
I think that's what we're looking for. And Councillor Kobayashi, did you have some input?
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. So I'm just going to counter back to you, Mr. Earl. Is it not better for us to sort of set a target of what we think it should be, and then you guys are the experts at it, and you can come back and say this is what we could do. We can give you the Volkswagen solution for this. So if Councillor Parkinson isn't far wrong, we're going to have to bring that number down. This is an obvious one. At the same time, trying to meet some of our objectives. So instead of battling each line item and be here all night, my suggestion is, okay, so the 111 is there to stay. That's a given. So can the rest of it be reduced by a half, or even eliminated, or moved to the following year? And we count on your expertise. I certainly don't want to micromanage how you do it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I have Councillor Jansen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just Just to reiterate, I mean, we went through a punishing process in November to establish what it is that we're looking at right now. So I would remind council that, I mean, we've done the heavy lifting on this. And I think what Councillor Kobayashi is suggesting is fair. You know, this is the Cadillac, show us a Volkswagen with a 1% reduction in this area and what that looks like next time we come back. And I think we asked for that in certain areas. And I don't want to get into whether I would prefer trail maintenance over, you know, ditches or what have you, but well, what they think the best bang for the 1% increase might be.
Thank you. Back to the Chief Administrative Officer.
Thank you, Chair Day. As has been referenced, Council led administration through a service review process, and out of that process, you guided us to areas of service delivery where Council was interested in seeing options in this process for increased service levels. And so within the Parks and Trails area, within the area that we're discussing now, we've got 4 of those up for consideration. And if we take kind of 111 off the 276, we've got you know, about $160,000 worth of possible additional services. And so if committee was interested in a particular dollar number, we would also be interested in, is there a focus area of increased service delivery that was less important to council? And so would it make more sense for us not to proceed with increased trail maintenance and urban forest and focused on invasive plants and parks in general? And so ultimately, administration is desirous to connect our service delivery to your service level expectations. And we don't want to presume what those expectations are. And we have provided solutions here this evening that are neither Cadillac nor Yugo, but what we try to provide a middle of the road solution. If what we have on the table at this juncture is not resonating with your service level expectations, we are happy to provide different options, but would ask that you guide us with respect to what particular services you would like to see either decreased, maintained, or increased from the suggested increases.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Council, I think that we could get bogged down here. So what I'm going to suggest is that if there's any specific information that we want, let's get that tonight. But I'm going to recommend, and I understand the reluctance with the overall tax increase, but what I'm hoping we can look for is to go home and really think about this and come back with some suggestions for our March 16th meeting so that we can really formulate that with intention rather than on the fly, the particular page that we're looking at this juncture, and really think about where can we tighten our belt if belt tightening is where we're thinking we'd like to go. Looking for hands if anybody wants to do something differently. If not, I will suggest that we move on through our budget review with Ms. Hepting. I'm not seeing any hands, so Jen, over to you.
Great, thank you very much. So we do have a couple of proposed initiatives relative to this service delivery area. So coming out of the Master Parks and Rec Plan, we are now looking at creating individual parks management plans that will guide improvements, guide maintenance efforts to specific parks. And so proposed individual plans for 2021, we're looking at Colwood Creek Park, Latoria Creek Park, and Ocean View Park. And those parks in particular are being proposed based on feedback we received through the master planning process. And in addition, we're proposing the creation of a comprehensive urban forest management plan that will guide the stewardship over a 10-year management plan period. And so those two initiatives will be led between both community planning and our Parks and Trails team.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any hands. Oh, wait a minute. Councillor Parkinson.
What would be the effect on the tax rate if we asked to defer those, either one or both of those for a year?
No direct effect on the tax rate. These are both proposed to be funded through reserve balances. So if these are deferred, it would simply free up those reserve balances in this year.
Thank you.
If there's no further questions, we'll move on to the Boulevards service plan. And as you can see, just before I get started, highlighted before you, there are some proposed updates to what was published in the initial draft plan. And so in this area, what we heard in the fall was a recommendation to increase our boulevard garden maintenance, to increase our boulevard beautification efforts, and to increase our boulevard urban forestry. And we also heard to maintain our boulevard lawn maintenance and maintain our roadside mowing.
Oh. Sorry, I'm trying to make out the red and I missed Councillor Baxter. Mr. Unmute.
Sorry, I'm not sure if Jen Hempting was done at that point.
I think she was.
Sorry, I've developed a habit when I notice the hand, I pause, which may be a little disjointed, but please go ahead.
Okay, all I wanted to do was sort of get ahead of the conversation and say that I think these additional beautification services were mainly targeted at the Royal Bay area, where we've been creating a lot of new boulevard planting and have not been able to provide enough maintenance to even meet what I would call a UGO standard. So I'm very glad to see this additional funding in here to see if we can get up to at least a Volkswagen standard. Thank you.
And we have Councillor Parkinson and then Councillor Kobayashi. Councillor Parkinson?
Thank you, Chair. The first attempt that I saw after being elected to council on trying to allocate where time went for public works employees had a large number in it for cul-de-sac island maintenance. If I'm correct, I think it was 4 FTEs. Now this is quite a while ago, and it was very early days. But the cul-de-sac island maintenance is one thing that I'm wondering how much time is actually spent on that, and if in fact that's worthwhile, or if that should be turned over. I know we hired somebody to help with volunteer coordination. If cul-de-sac islands couldn't be a volunteer thing within the city, I wouldn't want volunteers to do the islands in the middle of Souk Road or anything that needed, traffic control or something more sophisticated. But if the number for cul-de-sac maintenance is approximately, or cul-de-sac island maintenance is approximately 4 FTEs, I'm wondering if there's not some potential savings by taking that away from our skilled public works crew and allowing some volunteers to take it on. And I guess that's a question to the parks people is, to start with, was that original figure, did it have any substance to it, or is it just out to lunch and it's only a very minor amount of work to do the cul-de-sac island maintenance?
Yeah, it's Gord Bavillier through the chair. Councilor Parkins. Yeah, the boulevard or the cul-de-sac maintenance at this point is just like a one-time, usually a one-time springtime cleanup, and that's pretty much it for us for cul-de-sac maintenance. When I first started here, there was a program, and I can't really give you details, but a lot of the cul-de-sacs were done by actual community residents around those cul-de-sacs and that sort of thing. It did work for a while, and then as people move away or as people get older or whatever, it just, the cul-de-sacs tend to be forgotten, and then we have quite a cleanup on our hands for those. But at this point, the cul-de-sac is a very minor maintenance.
Okay, I think that makes more sense to me. As I said, that number stuck out and seemed wrong, and it stuck in my head, and now I can flush it because I've got more accurate information. So thank you for.
Excellent. Okay, back to you, Jen.
Thank you very much. Are there any further questions or comments with respect to this service area? If not, we'll move forth into the storm sewers.
Just a quick question from me, Jen. Just the urban forestry, I'm just wondering, how is that different from what we looked at under parks and trails? Is that just trees that are beside a road, or?
Hello, through the chair, this is Gord again. Yeah, that would be boulevard trees compared to parks trees.
Okay, perfect. Just wanted to make sure we weren't doubling things up.
So moving into the storm sewers service area, the recommendations we heard this fall was to maintain our open drainage system servicing and to increase our closed drainage system servicing. And so what you have before you is a proposal that will see this increased service transitioned in over a 2-year period. And so specifically, we're estimating based on a 4-year maintenance rotation cycle at a cost that we're estimating of $6 per lineal meter or $52,500 a year over that 4-year cycle. And in addition, we're anticipating that the equivalent of 1 FTE would be required to support this increased service. And with respect to that 1 FTE, we're proposing to phase in that increased staffing with 50% increased staffing in year 1, and then the added incremental cost in year 2.
Great. So when you say increase the servicing, your meaning is the looking after the existing infrastructure, not increasing the amount of closed storm sewers that we have?
This is the increasing of the maintenance servicing of that infrastructure.
Perfect. I'm not seeing any hands, so, oh, there we have Councillor Parkinson.
Sorry, I guess we could all get home a lot quicker if I just quit my questions. So I guess on this, it sounds like the intention would be to do a quarter of the 35-kilometer pipes every year. And does this include any sort of repairs or that would be discovered, or would this just be to do the flushing and camera work required? And I guess following that, does it make sense to do a quarter of the system every year, or would it make more sense to do it all at once? Would there be cost savings to do it all 1 year and then I guess knock off whatever deficiencies were discovered over the next few years and then do it again?
I see Brent Molnar has his hand up to answer.
Thank you very much. And through the chair to Councillor Parkinson. The reason why we divided the city into quarters was to simply manage the intake of information. All the videos need to be reviewed. They need to be commented on and then placed into the budgetary cycle where works are necessary. We could undertake a more thorough program, but we potentially need to set aside more staff time to be able to review that program. Yes, that would have a direct offset into other years. You're bang on correct about that, but the intention of the quarters was to be able to do it in manageable chunks, so to speak, focusing on our hotspot areas and then quelling an entire portion of the city in one fell swoop, so that we could accurately report and work forward in terms of the budget cycle. Hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
I have a quick question, and it's just in regards to this service. I guess in my mind, I was making some assumptions, and so I thought about that and decided that probably better to just ask staff if my assumptions are what they're also thinking. Because when I looked at this, I thought, well, wouldn't that be a candidate for a service to be contracted out? But I'm assuming that we're wanting to do this work ourselves so that we can increase our understanding and awareness of the issues throughout the city. Would that be correct?
Through the chair, a significant portion, the long line, so to speak, of our storm systems are contracted out. Video companies do the jobs very efficiently and very well. The minor sections, we have the ability to do in-house with our own camera equipment and crew personnel monitoring it live. So it's the long lines that we do contract it out. We started that works this year, and it's the minor segments which are handled in-house.
Great, thank you.
And so if there's no further questions or discussion, we'll move to the next service area. So with the city's sewer utility, coming out of the service review, we received direction to maintain our sanitary service delivery. And I will take a moment to kind of go through the funding sources in this area. And so the city we levy a local service area tax. It's to recover capital infrastructure costs, the debt servicing costs that are associated with we have two active areas that we're actively taxing for right now, Colwood East and Colwood Central. And so that taxation directly covers the annual debt servicing for those areas. Sewer connection fees, as we have commented on in the past, the intention there is that those fees cover the costs associated with connections work, which year to year can be difficult to predict. In part depends on the demand in those areas. And we have flagged that for fee review to ensure that we are capturing the full cost recovery with those fees that we're charging. Sewer enhancement fees that are collected under bylaw, they are transferred directly to our sewer capital reserve for purposes of enhancing the city's sewer system infrastructure works. So that funding gets set aside. When we look at the operating budget in this area, there's two primary drivers that are driving the proposed budget increase for our sewer user fees. So simply put, the intention is that our sewer user fee funds the ongoing maintenance costs associated with this service area delivery. And up until this year, a large part of our CRD requisition was that of our share of the infrastructure costs of the region's sewage treatment plant. 2021 sees that infrastructure drop off that capital piece of the requisition. And in place, we're seeing an increase in our requisition operating costs for that area. To date, those costs have been recovered through the CRD mill rate. And what this budget proposes is the start of a transition to be funding those operating costs through the sewer utility. And the 5-year financial plan proposes a transition between 2021 and 2026 to be then moving to fully funding the operating costs. So that's what's being proposed in this draft budget. In addition, historically, from a budgetary standpoint, we didn't have sufficient sewer user fees for purposes of our main maintenance. And so we've made that update budgetary correction to ensure that we do have the sufficient user fees budgeted for our anticipated maintenance works.
Thanks. I have Councillor Kobayashi.
Thank you very much. Through the chair, Jen, can you just justify why you want to do this? Like, what's the benefit to the taxpayer to do it this way? Could you answer that? Thank you.
Certainly. So the intention is that the sewer utility is to be fully funding all of the related costs of our sewer system. And so right now, it is currently not when it comes to the CRD sewage treatment costs. And so that is in part the intention to make that transition over a period of time. Our proportional share of the sewage treatment operating costs is $1 million. And so the implication to consider is the impact that would have if we made a shift from moving that off of the CRD general mill rate levy that's levied on all taxpayers to the user fee levy that's levied on those that are physically connected to the city's sewer system.
Oh, makes sense now. I absolutely understand it. Thank you very much.
Next, I have Mayor Martin.
Thank you, Chair. 2 quick questions. The first is comparing the 2020 budget to the 2021 budget line items. In the 2020 budget, we were 1.15 for revenue, and then we were the exact same number for total operating expenses. For 2021, there's a $20,000 discrepancy between what our revenue is and what our operating expenses are, and I'm just wondering why that doesn't balance.
Thank you very much, Mayor Martin. I appreciate that. That discrepancy has been caught just on the slide deck that I have before us, and it will be updated so that those 2 figures do in fact balance.
Okay, great. Thank you. My second question is looking at the actuals for 2020. The actuals, basically, we received 1.3 million and received or spent 1.29, which basically represented a $52,000 surplus. Where did that $52,000 go? Did that go into general revenue, or should that not be reflected in the 2021 revenue?
Thank you very much. So as we finalize for year end, any of the surplus that is generated will ultimately form part of the sewer utility surplus and for purposes of the sewer utility. And so it certainly could be considered and then utilized to affect that rate that we will need to be looking to change as we go into 2021.
So just saying it back, Jen, so that I'm correct, or that I think I understood you. So that $52,000 of additional revenue that was not spent in 2020 does not go into general revenue. It goes into, or general accounting. It will come back to this specific
this
department
utility.
Or sewer utility. Perfect. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Excellent. So I have a question for you, Jen. I'm looking at on your slide deck under operating expenses for the administration. the budget and the actual is more than double what the budget was. And can you just speak to that for me and how that is impacting 21? Did we lose you, Jen?
I'm thinking if I can answer that quite quickly, and I cannot. So I will return with that specific information.
Okay, no problem. Councillor Parkinson.
I think I'm as confused about all these sewer numbers and costs as the rest of the world is. But I believe a lot of these things are not showing up on the general tax rate, aren't they? Like the local service areas are people paying with a capital cost of their sewers. So I guess sort of two parts of the question. One, how much of this is directly billed back to people who have connected to the sewer system and therefore are paying for that service? And secondly, how do the costs for people that are connected to the sewer service pay for that service? How are they looking in 2021 compared to 2020? Is there a significant change in the stuff that doesn't show up in the actual overall tax rate?
Great question. Thank you very much. So I'll take a minute to walk through that. All of these costs that you see before you here do not impact the general taxpayer. A portion of the CRD, and right now a large portion of the CRD sewage treatment costs, we do recover through the CRD mill rate. That information is not reflected in our budget, but it does show up on the tax notice. The impact to our sewer users, so those folks that are physically connected to our sewer system, won't realize an impact. Right now the budgetary increase is 40%. There's two big factors to keep in mind. One is every year we have increased sewer users. As development continues to increase, those properties are on sewer, so they're increasing the population that pays into this utility. So as you can see, in 2020, we actualized revenues of $720,000, which was $120,000 approximately increase over our budget. Moving into 2021, I think we're looking at an additional approximately 170 folios on our roll. I expect all or almost all of those will be sewer users that will be paying into this. So I will have a better, more accurate answer later this spring as we run analysis on our rates as to what the impact will be on a sewer user for a fee change. And so in recent years, we haven't changed our fees, certainly the last couple of years, and we will be looking at a fee increase, but I don't anticipate the direct impact to the homeowner will be to the extent of how the budget is shown, simply because we've had increased sewer users coming online consistently.
Good answer, Jen.
Sorry, Councillor Parkinson, are you muted?
Yes, I was. Thank you. If I may, Madam Chair, just to follow up on that. So when the CRD costs have been recovered from the CRD mill rate and that's sort of gradually going away, but in the meantime, who pays the CRD mill rate the same for everybody who's a sewer user and a non-sewer user, or is it different?
That's correct. Yes.
So people not on sewers would have the same CRD mill rate as people on sewers, and part of that cost would be to do with CRD sewer costs.
That is correct.
And you're moving away from that mechanism.
Gradually. So this plan proposes technically over the next 6 years to move away from that.
Thank you.
I have a question from Councillor Baxter. Councillor Baxter?
unmute always helps, doesn't it?
It does.
I just wanted to clarify that last answer. So is the reason we are moving away because the nature of the charge is changing?
The reason that we're
what is being recovered is changing?
yes, so for consideration, and so we've had past discussions. I mean, some of these are going back 7, 8 years or so, about how ultimately administration has received direction on how we are funding and who is responsible for these costs. And so right now, to date, those sewage treatment costs, which have all been infrastructure capital as part of the requisition, those have been simply the entire requisition. We have been levying as a mill rate on all users in the city. The treatment plant now coming online, and we're seeing a flip. And so we're not being requisitioned, we're being invoiced these operating costs. And technically those should be borne through the sewer utility. And so what this budget proposes is a gradual transition for the utility to bear responsibility and ultimately for the direct sewer users. And so this is something that based on my understanding of everything, we could receive direction otherwise, but we have proposed to start to transition that burden to the sewer users.
So a part of what we're being charged for the sewage treatment plant is now maintenance, but isn't a part still capital?
We're not seeing those capital costs. And I can certainly return with further detail, but those capital costs that form part of our requisition have fallen off with the draft 2021 requisition. And we are seeing the introduction of maintenance charges that will not be requisitioned by the CRD, but will be invoiced.
It doesn't seem very likely that in the year in which they completed it, if they have, that they've also paid off the capital costs. So I think it would be useful if you could find out where we are being charged that capital cost.
I will certainly return with further information.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
If there are no further questions, we'll move forth to the Rec, Culture and Heritage Service Plan. And so we did hear from the West Shore Parks and Recreation Society at the March 1st Committee of the Whole meeting with a background on their requisition and the city's proportionate share of that requisition. So as was mentioned, overall, they've increased their requisition by 3.9%. And the impact for Colwood with our proportionate share is just shy of 3.5%. What I will highlight historically, certainly in recent years, from a budgetary stance, we had continually maintained a 2% increase regardless of where the requisition came in. And as has been previously discussed, the intention there was, however that requisition actualized, any remaining budget was transferred to our reserves for purposes of recreation. We have shifted our methodology with this budget so that the operating budget for the recreation center's requisition mirrors, in fact, what we are expecting the requisition to be. And we have introduced a budgeted transfer to reserves for purposes of requisition. In actuality, we're not proposing anything differently from what we have been doing in recent years, but from a budgetary stance, that's what's driving the appearance of a decrease in our rec center costs. overall, this budget does propose that we're maintaining that 2% increase and proposes that those funds be set aside. The Greater Victoria Public Library's total requisition increase remained flat at 0%. Our proportionate share increased by the 34,000 and change that you see reflected in the budget before you. And lastly, we do maintain core operating funding for purposes of supporting our Heritage Commission under the leadership of our community planning team. And we have proposed a budget increase there as we further enhance the works with our commission that we have underway.
Great. I have Mayor Martin.
Thank you, Chair. I do have a question in regards to the library, but just going back really quickly to the sewer utility, there was a question by Councillor Baxter around the debt servicing and when the capital cost of the wastewater plant is done. And there is a debt that will be paid off in 2040. So the capital cost to that project is still being paid off by all the municipalities until 2040. Moving on to because I'm very intimately familiar with both the library and the rec center. The one, and I understand that this is an operating cost, but for those who may not be familiar on council, what happens with the libraries is that there's a library operating cost that is shared throughout all the municipalities, but the buildings themselves are owned by the municipalities and are responsible on their own to maintain and keep those buildings operating. So, for example, the Wanda Fuca Library is owned by 4 municipalities: Langford, Colwood, Metchosin, and Highlands. What was happening was we were paying West Shore Park and Rec into a fund to maintain the building at the Wanda Fuca Library. And for example, we were putting funds, I think, close to $40,000 a year to maintain or to replace the roof. How would I see that in this budget, Jen?
So from a budgetary stance, that budget remains with the library. From an administrative stance on how we remit the funds, there will be a change going forth with that change. I think that materialized just this past fall.
So when I look at the library and the 909 cost for 2021, that includes the building, the physical building maintenance, as well as the operating of it includes the operation of the building in addition to the services that GVPL are providing to the municipality.
Yes,
or
it
does not. Is that a different line item somewhere else within our budget?
No, it's rolled within this budget line item.
Okay, so when I say that for 2021 the library is costing the city of Colwood 909, that's all in.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
And now I have Councillor Kobayashi.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much, Mayor Martin. I was going to bring this whole thing up, and the one issue was, even though GVPL their requisition increase is 0%. In fact, because of our increase in population, and no, actually it was driven by our property assessment value went up. So even though it's a 0%, we've got a bigger proportion. But my question actually is related to that, and it's directed through the chair to Jen. Jen, I noticed that when people are doing these calculations, and most of the things that we belong to regionally is usually based on a magic formula of tax assessment, 50% tax assessment plus 50% population, and so that seems to be the standard that I've seen around right now, with the GVPL, with SIP, with others. But I noticed the other day ago when we had that presentation by the rec center, and he was doing the calculations based on a population and a population count of 18,900 people for 2021, and his source was a CRD data census study. Like, is there a standard that we use? Because I think he's kind of out to lunch that we're almost 19,000 people this year. Because then, you know, we're 100 short of stopping to get that small community grant. And so I guess my question is there a standard that you watch for when they're doing these calculations?
Great question, Councillor Kobayashi. So I will say the calculations do vary. GVPL, we look at a 50-50 split. In some instances, our proportionate share is based directly on assessed value. In some instances, it's what we call converted assessed value, where we all convert our payment in lieu values. With those splits, I mean, certainly what's most important is to ensure that whatever population information is being used consistently. With West Shore Parks and Rec population stats, I would have to confirm back with them where they pulled that information from and how it compared to the population stats that were utilized for purposes of our library requisition, for example.
Okay, thank you.
Next, I have Councillor Baxter and then Mayor Martin.
So last night we did have a speaker who pointed to the arts and coalition initiatives, arts and culture initiatives, $42,000 budget, and I believe said that that was our only contribution to art. And I'd just like to put forward the argument that the library, being about literature, is one of the arts, only one of them, I admit. But it would seem to me that in that way, the city's contribution to the arts is still much less than the contribution to sport or recreation, but it is at least a lot more than 42,000. So I just wanted to put that argument forward. Thank you.
Mayor Martin.
Thank you. This is actually a question to our rep, who is Councillor Kobayashi. Councillor Kobayashi, normally we would have a presentation from the library with Maureen Salwa explaining some of this stuff, and I'm not looking for a detailed explanation, but could you possibly share with us, you know, we budgeted $874,000 for 2020, and the library basically spent it. You know, they were up to 862, but the library was closed significantly over the COVID periods, but there wasn't any equivalent savings at all, and I'm just wondering, Councillor Kobayashi, do you have any comment to that?
I'll try very, very hard, Mayor Martin, but it's very similar to, we look at our operation here in Colwood. Okay, so I'm just going to use that as an example. You would have thought we would have had this big saving because we were closed down for part of the time also. There have been a lot of extra costs due to COVID-19, believe me. I think the best person to actually that could break it down is Maureen, and I think she's due to come out and do a presentation to us at some time, or maybe she's already did it. But anyways, they'll break it down. But I know that looking at the numbers when we were looking at this, there were a lot of costs, added costs with the COVID-19. And so, but I couldn't tell you to the penny, Mayor Martin, exactly what where everything went, but I understand.
No.
What you're saying, but
yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you, Councillor Kobayashi. I just want to give you an opportunity to sort of comment for the public because they would just sort of have that question. Thank you, Chair.
No problem. Councillor Parkinson.
Jen, am I getting ahead of myself? I see you don't have special initiatives on this slide, but you do have them in your report. Are you going to be talking about those, or?
Yes,
Right,
absolutely.
okay. I'll let you do your bit then. Sorry to jump the gun.
Not at all. So one item I haven't yet commented on is that of consideration for participation in the CRD's Arts and Culture Support Service. And so council received information this past fall with respect to this service and directed staff to bring forth consideration so we could receive direction on whether or not this is something the city wishes to participate in. The financial implications of this are not factored into our budget. Should we choose to participate, our CRD requisition would increase and it would impact our CRD mill rate. I do intend to publish the background documentation that we've received with the March 16th meeting. But I did want to raise that will be coming forth for consideration based on what we heard this past fall.
I would just share with the rest of council that Laura Davis, who spoke to us yesterday, also has suggested that belonging to the CRD Arts and Culture Support Service would be beneficial to the arts in Colwood from their perspective, because it would allow West Shore participants to meet with their regional counterparts through that type of programming and events that are put on. So I just share that for your information. And I have Councillor Jansen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I hate to say it, but I come from an artistic family, family of musicians, and I'm hitting maximum density on arts groups, quite frankly. I think honestly, we need to pick something and run with it, because we seem to be sort of dabbling in multiple groups as opposed to maybe picking one flagship to represent our community and moving forward. I'm not a big fan of investing in the CRD, and I think the point was made that likely those, I think I asked the question, I wasn't completely satisfied with the answer, but I mean, like anything to do with the core of our region, you find that these dollars get sucked downtown somewhere. And I would be reticent to participate in that before actually, picking something in our community and running with it. But I'm starting to tune out a little bit with the number of these programs coming forward, and how do you differentiate one from the other? And I mean, I'm telling you, I'm lost. And I would love to see them all maybe get together and make an impassioned pitch as a single entity, as opposed to what appears to be some competing interests. So those are some of my thoughts on that, and I'm not sure that I expect a response, but thank you.
Okay, Jen, back to you.
Thank you very much. So here's the summary of the initiatives that are related to recreation, culture, and heritage for the city. I did receive an update from West Shore Parks, and recreation staff. They had applied for grant funding to help fund the skate park that's being proposed. They were not successful on that grant application. They continued to pursue other grant opportunities, and they are continuing with hopes of having this skate park actualize. And so the city's contribution that was discussed and approved under last year's budget remains in this year's budget. Commented a little bit last night about the Safe Restart grant contribution. To date, council has resolved $225,000, primarily for purposes of fee drops that West Shore Parks and Rec need to ensure they have the funding to restart and deliver on those services, including the pool reopening. Moving into new initiatives that have been proposed, we have a $10,000 proposal to fund a plan that will see kind of how the city dresses itself up, you know, whether it's through lighting displays or banner, various art throughout the city. We're also looking a proposal to fund the compilation of a heritage strategy that would be work done in partnership between our community planning team and our Heritage Commission. And then moving into next year, we're looking at a couple of arts and culture related initiatives, one being the development of a public art policy, and the second being the facilitation of a public art competition that would encourage some public art here in the city. And so those initiatives that I just referenced under the leadership of our communications and our community planning teams.
I'll recognize Mayor Martin.
Thank you. I'm actually supportive of all these special initiatives, and I think they're important to go. I do want to say, I do just want to make a comment, and this is more to committee than it is to staff, and it's in regards to the West Shore Park and Rec skateboard park. And I think it's fantastic the city of Colwood has stepped up and that we're supporting it close to $100,000. I sincerely hope the second grant allows the skateboard park or provides that funding. But if it doesn't, I think this council, we seriously need to begin to look at innovative ways to make this happen faster than slower. I will just say this just once, and it's incredibly stressful for me that as this plan has moved forward 2 or 3 years ago, the estimated cost was somewhere between $600,000 and $700,000. The exact same skateboard park is now being estimated as being over $1 million. And I'm worried that we're going to continue to see these escalations in costs as we move forward. And we really need to be conscious as a council. How do we make this happen? This has to happen sooner than later. So that's just my one support of the skateboard park specifically. And I know it's a little off of budget, and thank you for allowing me to say that, Chair.
No problem. Councillor Parkinson.
Well, ditto to what the mayor said. I too think the skate park is a vital addition to our community. But I guess my question for Jen is, again, how do these impact this year's taxes? For instance, the skate park contribution, I think we agreed to that last year. Presumably that's sitting in a reserve fund waiting until the grant comes through to be able to construct it. So are any of these sort of affecting our tax rate this year? Some are COVID. Anyway, I'll let you answer the question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So none of our special initiatives will directly impact our tax or our tax lift that's proposed. All of our special initiatives are primarily funded through our future operating expenditure reserve or surplus funds. Skate park in particular is actually utilization of our community amenity reserves.
So I'm just going to jump in there, and first I just want to offer a compliment on the way the budget is laid out. It makes infinite sense that special initiatives are funded from other methods than tax lifts because they're not recurring, hopefully. And I think that's just an example of how we are doing well with capturing our information and sharing it out to the public. And I just want to speak in support also of doing what we can to move that skate park along. It is a real opportunity to do, I guess, 2 really important things. One, give our community what they ask for, because there was a great deal of public support for that. And the other is to create safe spaces for youth, especially youth who are maybe not big joiners, I guess is the best way to describe it. Youth who enjoy doing things, but maybe not in prescribed groups or prescribed ways. So I just think that it will be a real asset to our whole community. And especially if it's at West Shore Parks and Rec, it'll be in our core business district, a place of joy. Thank you. Oh, we have one more hand. Councillor Kobayashi.
Thank you very much. Just to your point, Mayor Martin, I'm also a supporter of the skate park. I just don't understand, like $1 million is peanuts. I mean, sorry, if you raise this privately, I don't even know how they're organized. Like I'm curious now. You've got me very curious, because raising $1 million for something like this is easy. They're not talking to the right people. That's all I could say. Thank you.
Oh, back to you, Jen. Oh, we have another hand. Parkinson.
I would challenge the last statement from Councillor Kobayashi. And frankly, Doug, if you go out and raise the money for this thing, I'll buy you dinner in the nicest restaurant in town, because raising money in this community is not that easy, in my experience. But maybe you're better at it than I ever was. Anyway, I applaud your efforts. I'll write you a check when you start your campaign.
I'll take you up on that one.
And so with that, we are through the review of the city's service plans and ultimately through a review of our operating budget. And so what's before you here is a summary of the proposed expenditure as it relates to our capital infrastructure program. And so we roll up these budgets by class of infrastructure. So roads, buildings, and or facilities, drainage, equipment, etc. And we then have the roll up of the proposed funding sources. And I do want to highlight in the published document, we had general taxation. That is in fact a debt funding source that's proposed there. And I did want to take an opportunity just to provide some commentary on our funding sources that we utilize and just provide a little bit of background on the restrictions related to those funding sources. So as I mentioned last night, when it comes to these somewhat, the one-time expenditures or our capital infrastructure, construction works or fleet acquisitions, we utilize surplus, reserve, and grant funding primarily, as well as, road DCCs for eligible road DCC projects. And so the city, when it comes to our surplus balances, we have two distinct operating funds that generate surplus, our sewer utility, and then our general operating fund. And so our general operating fund surplus balance, often, in recent years, we've been generating a surplus annually, in part due to, how we're funding increased services and the timing for the related expenditure. Also often due to staffing turnover, transition, that sort of thing. We generate surplus. Right now, as we start 2021, we're looking at a general operating surplus of somewhere in the vicinity of $7 million. And that is providing a funding source that we are proposing to spend in large part in this financial plan. We currently have 3 bylaws that speak to how our reserve funds are to be utilized. And in addition, there may be other bylaws that relate that provide specifics, and I'll comment on that in a minute. Our intention is to bring forth a review of those bylaws and have a conversation with council about how we propose to consolidate that information, and also have a conversation with how we propose to be funding transfers over, or what specific types of revenues would relate to specific bylaws, ultimately to revisit what we have in existence right now. And I'm really hopeful to bring that forth this year. It will really help facilitate these conversations in the future. But just to kind of give a quick overview, our future operating expenditure reserve fund, we have a balance in that just shy of $2 million. That's one of the primary funding sources for our special initiatives. And we do maintain a little sustainable funding. I mentioned earlier, sometimes, we have maintenance schedules that require inspections every 5 years, for example. So we will set aside funding annually and then draw down on that reserve balance when the expenditure need arises. We have both a general capital and a sewer capital reserve fund. How those funds are utilized is really quite broad. It's for purposes of city infrastructure, whether it's the sewer utility or elsewhere. And legislation also requires, if we have any sale of land, for example, any surplus on that, we would set aside into this specific capital reserve fund. We also maintain fleet and equipment reserve funds for purposes of our fire fleet and equipment, our sewer utility, and then our general fleet and equipment. When we introduced our sustainable infrastructure policy and plan, this is one of the few areas where we are just about sustainably funded. And this is one of those areas that will be getting a direct review. So we brought forth an updated policy. Our public works team brought forth an updated policy in the fall as it pertains to public works, fleet, and specified equipment usage. Fire, under our strategic priorities, we've got a fleet policy slated for review in that area, and that will give us an opportunity as well to review and reconfirm whether or not we are in fact achieving sustainable funding levels for those reserves. But when you see proposed expenditures for fleet or equipment, the funding source is coming out of those reserves. Our community amenities, we currently have funding of approximately $2.7 million there. A large portion of this funding is restricted, and specifically to building facilities that would represent a community amenity. So whether it be fire services or recreation service, policing services, but restricted to building. We have a portion of the funding that does not have the same zoning restriction under our land use bylaw. And the financial plan before you, we are proposing spending some of the unrestricted amenity funding on both the West Shore Parks and Rec skate park contribution, as well as the design and construction that's proposed for Murray's Pond Boardwalk. Then we have our affordable housing reserve fund. We've recently had a conversation about that fund and the balance, and we have received direction, and you will see funding set aside for purposes of contributions in the financial plan to the tune of the $488,000 that was recommended. The RCMP surplus fund, we have had some conversations in recent years. So as we have budgeted for our authorized police strength staffing, and inevitably, due to leaves, and we can certainly articulate more on this at the next meeting when we meet with Inspector Preston to discuss the policing service area. But as leaves actualize after a 30-day period, our direct costs drop. And so historically, we have realized a surplus there, which this reserve sees us set that aside specifically. And we have received council direction to then transfer that for purposes of the police building reserve fund to start to set aside funding there, which in this budget, we are proposing utilization of some amount of that for purposes of their renovation and some minor works at the detachment center there. We also have bylaws that speak to a new fire hall reserve fund, a public art reserve fund, and the public art, the balances in both of these are quite nominal. We're looking at a couple $100,000 in the new fire hall fund. Public art, we are proposing to utilize that reserve funding for purposes of the art competition that we just mentioned on. For purposes of parks and recreation, we have been setting aside some funding annually that generates as a result of maintaining that 2% increase for the West Shore Parks and requisition. In addition, we received direction from council a few years ago, ultimately as the result of land that we received through development in Royal Bay, and that generated approximately $1 million on sale to the school district, and we had received direction that be set aside into this reserve. And so for purposes of Parks and Rec, there's approximately $1.2 million projected at the end of 2020. The Climate Action Reserve Fund is not one that's yet established by bylaw, but we have received direction from council to set aside the climate action reserve monies that we receive annually to the tune, I think we have approximately $60,000 to $70,000. And one of the initiatives we spoke about earlier in deliberations, the incentive grants that we're looking to partnership with the Clean Energy BC Fund, that Climate Action Reserve provides the funding for those grants. St. John's Heritage Church, has a balance of a little over $100,000. And again, under bylaw, that sees us annually analyze ultimately what the remaining income is for our facility rental revenues. And we set that aside for purposes specific to that facility. And then our Sustainable Infrastructure Fund, of course, is the one that we are looking to set aside that annual tax lift of 1%. So when we initially started analysis of determining what our sustainable infrastructure level needs would be, we were looking at about a 12-year period. And technically, we would be in year 2 right now of that. That being said, while we didn't budget for the increase last year, we do anticipate that we will be bringing forth a proposal for council's consideration to give direction for us to put some of our surplus that is otherwise generating specifically into this reserve. And lastly, gas tax. So currently, we have a balance of just shy of about $5.4 million, and we are proposing full spend of this funding in the financial plan and beyond right now. And what I mean by that is, as we get into the capital program specifically, there are certain items, expenditures in particular with respect to some of our sidewalk bike lane programming initiatives where we have applied for grant funding. If that is not successful, we'll then look to utilize the gas tax funding. But I highlight that because we're intending to look at the creation of an annual program that in years 3, 4, and 5 is to the tune of $1.2 million annually. And depending on the utilization of the gas tax funding in years 1 and 2, we need to look at alternate funding sources to support those expenditures. And then with DCCs, we maintain both road and sewer DCCs. With the road DCCs, as you know, we'll be bringing forward an update to that program. And the restrictions there are directly tied to the projects that we have defined in that program. And then lastly, we do have some cash in lieu balances that are funding sources, again, for specific purposes. So we have about $500,000 in Parklands cash in lieu, and we have a little over $1 million in frontage cash in lieu. And I appreciate that was a little long-winded, but that's a little bit of the background on the restrictions that we need to consider as we propose and utilize these balances. And then lastly, what I haven't highlighted here, but is debt financing. And there is a rather comprehensive summary in the financial plan, just in terms of what our annual debt servicing costs are and where we are at with respect to our liability servicing limit. And so that also is a funding source that can be considered. And just something to maybe keep in mind, you know, if we look at the current rates as they are right now over a 10-year term, if we were borrowing $1 million to service that, would be approximately $100,000. And so that's the flip of it. For any expenditures where we do propose to utilize debt, we need to consider how we're going to service those debt payments. And so if it's for purposes of the sewer utility, we would be looking at servicing either through the sewer user fee or a parcel tax to recover specifically for that, depending on the expenditure. And then alternatively, we'd have options within either general taxation or general parcel taxes if we went the way of, for example, a local area.
Perfect. I have Councillor Kobayashi.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair Day. Another quick question for you, Jen. You know, I did hear you, if I heard you say this, operating surpluses this year, you potentially going to come in with a recommendation that we put it in towards the sustainable infrastructure, because we made that conscious decision last year not to do it because of the 0% tax increase. Are we allowed to take surpluses and use them towards operating budgets the following year? Is that allowed to offset tax increases? Could you answer that question?
That's a great question. It can be allowed if we factor it into our financial plan. What we need to consider is that anytime we utilize one of these funding sources, it really is a one-time, it's not sustainable. Like, you hear the word sustainable used a lot. So whenever we do that, which, as you know, we made the decision to do that last year with respect to mitigating the tax increase that would have arisen in order to support the increased policing services. We made that decision to utilize a one-time transfer of reserves. And so it is allowed. We did factor it into our financial plan. And then this year, the financial plan does not propose the utilization of surpluses, which ultimately is in part having an impact on that 4% tax increase that was introduced last night.
Right, right. So, you just said a key word, sustainable, because a lot of the increases you're proposing anyways is they're long-term, they're going to be sustained. So a one-time carryover isn't going to help it. It just puts a Band-Aid on a bigger problem. Okay, thank you very much. You answered my question.
Thank you. And so with that, we'll jump into a review of the capital program, and we'll start with our road infrastructure program. So we do have a paving program in place. This program was utilized in 2020 to the tune of approximately $500,000 for paving works that occurred in 3 primary areas, I believe, in the city. And then moving forth, we have that funding in place. And as you can see, if we have where we have drainage works proposed, if there's an opportunity, to minimize interruption with those works, we will do so. The financial plan introduced the concept of a sidewalk and bike lane program, kind of undefined to specific areas under last year's financial plan. We also have 2 specific projects that have received previous budget approval, and we have talked about these recently with the updates that we've been hearing through the active transportation plan prioritization discussions. And so Painter Road, as was mentioned at committee meeting earlier this week, that is prioritized over to occur before the Metchosin Road project. And both of these, with Painter Road, we are proposing the utilization of gas tax funding. And then with Metchosin Road, we are proposing the utilization of road DCC funding.
I have Councillor Baxter. Mr. Unmute.
Sorry. Councillor Parkinson's motion the other night, Monday, I believe, put forward a new list of smaller projects, but they add up. And that was passed, and we have Metchosin Road and Painter Road here. As things stand, does it appear to be the intention of council to staff that we're going to do both of the projects on the screen right now, as well as the list passed on Monday in the next 2 years?
I'll defer to our CAO. I see he has his hand up.
Thank you. Through to Councillor Baxter. As committee is well aware, committee has passed a motion that will travel through to council next week. Should that motion receive council approval, one of the amendments that administration was going to suggest as part of the committee motion, an addendum to the committee motion, would be the phrase "subject to budget approval." Should council approve the motion as it was written without funding sources identified, that puts administration in the challenging position of not having legal authority to spend, but direction to spend. And so it's administration's belief, should that move through council, that Metchosin and Painter that you see on the list would remain generally as they are, but the sidewalk and bike lane program would need to be amended, either with a financial plan amendment immediately or in the near term. The financial plan as it sits now, I think, would generally cover off the 2021 expenses that were articulated in the committee supported motion. However, 2022, 2023, and years beyond would not cover the expenses envisioned. And so an amendment would be needed. Amendment would be needed at least in 2022, if not earlier.
Okay, that speaks to the budget. But I was thinking now, and I must admit I wasn't thinking it on Monday night, that it looks like we're adding more sidewalk and bike lane projects to your list, and still expecting them all to be done in 2021 and 2022. Will you, at the next council meeting, when you present the addendum to that motion on Monday night, will you be commenting on whether that is feasible given the resources we have?
Mr. Earl?
Thank you, Chair Day, and through to Councillor Baxter. Yes, would be the short answer. The budgets already exist for Machosen and Painter. The new work for 2021 was design of work for the immediate work to begin the designs of work for construction in 2022, followed by design of work for construction in 2023. So it's unclear at this juncture whether the 300,000 that's currently in this draft budget would cover those design costs. It may or may not, depending on how that motion looks once it comes through council post committee. We will also comment on the capacity of the team. If council is desirous to move those projects forward at the speed with which committee articulated, we're going to need to increase the size of our internal team to do that work beyond the increases that you've seen to the engineering team thus far in the budget already, and or contract out that management of those projects and or some combination of the two, or defer other work that was planned by that team to make room for the capacity to do those projects.
Okay, that sounds like a fairly serious discussion, which I imagine will take place at the council meeting. Thank you.
Excellent. Councillor Parkinson.
I was going to ask for a little nature break if I could, Councillor Day.
Sure. Let's take 5. We'll
Thank you.
be back at 8:36.
Thank you.
Just waiting for Michael. I can almost see if he's there.
I like how Michael sort of appears out of the woods because it looks very Narnia-like as he just opens that door and he just sort of there it is.
That's pretty good. That is Narnia-like. You just came out of the trees there, Michael. It looks like you exited the wardrobe. Whenever you're ready, Jen.
All right, so we do maintain some gas tax funding for purposes of our street light upgrade program. And we do have plans this year to upgrade 18 ornamental street lights in and around the Royal Bay Drive area.
Sorry, excuse me, Jen.
Sorry.
I don't know if you intended to be sharing your screen, but you're not right now.
Oh, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor, for noticing. I think I'm starting to fade.
And lastly, we do have funding set aside for purposes of traffic calming initiatives. So short-term pilot projects that may arise where we hear feedback from the community.
I don't see any hands if you want to move on.
Excellent. So we do maintain funding for purposes of signage and wayfinding. And we are looking to incorporate feedback from, in particular, the Citizens Environment Network in Colwood. And we'll be utilizing that feedback as we roll out increased enhanced signage for the city. With respect to crosswalk improvements, so in 2020, we undertook 3 specific crosswalk improvements, and we were successful in obtaining some ICBC grant funding that helped provide funding towards those works, which was great. Moving into this year, we don't have any signalized equipment upgrades proposed, but this funding can also provide the necessary resourcing for crosswalk painting works. The financial plan is proposing a 5-year plan to replace outdated traffic controllers, and we do have a prioritized list scheduled for those works. Public realm improvements. So this was a new infrastructure program that was introduced under last year's financial plan. This would be the first year for that plan. And really this is setting aside some sustainable tax funding annually to support the funding needs for scoping and design of projects that may arise from our waterfront or our Colwood Corners public realm improvement plan. With respect to transit improvements, so in recent years, we've seen a number of bus stop improvements throughout the city. Moving forward, we're working in conjunction with transit, and we have identified 4 priority stops so far for 2021 that's making up that work plan there. And then we do have some major bridge repair work that comes as a result of inspections that have occurred. And so we've got spend proposed for 2021 to do some replacement works, as well as in 2023 with respect to repaving works.
And Mayor Martin.
Thank you. I appreciate we're in budget, but I just wanted to get some clarification specifically around the traffic signal control upgrades. Will that include the speed reader program, or is that a completely different program that we have a tendency to move around the city when we want to measure or tell drivers how fast or slow they're going?
Brent is ready to jump in there.
Thank you very much. My apologies for not having my video on. This is Brent speaking. To answer Mayor Martin's question through the chair, no, it does not include what you've spoken about with speed reader. This is about intersection and signalization factors.
Okay, thank you. Is that somewhere in this budget at some point? Like, is that something we're looking at expanding? Because I've just been hearing a lot of neighborhoods wishing they had that. And I know we have a program that rotates it around.
Thank you very much. And through the chair to Mayor Martin, we, and I can't quite remember the date. It was a couple meetings ago, but we tabled roaming traffic calming measures, and we plan to implement that with portions of the funding that was set aside for the speed reader program and not expand the speed reader program. We do intend to expand our Bluetooth and our data collection program this year.
Okay, thank you. And one more question, Chair, if I may. Under transit improvements, sitting on the transit board, I'm aware that the City of Colwood has taken advantage of, I'm not sure if it's a cost sharing program or that we just requested actual shelters at specific bus stops. Could someone just comment, do we cost share the actual shelters, or is that all up to BC Transit to decide where they place them?
I think that might be Brent.
Yes, that is correct. Through the chair, thank you very much to Mayor Martin. The shelters that we've worked with BC Transit on that program that you're referring to are entirely provided by Transit at Transit's cost for the shelter. However, the city's costs are ensuring the pad and the systems like the curbing and whatnot is available around it. So the areas that we've selected this year were areas that we've already seen pad improvements in previous years, and we're looking to enhance the service delivery with this contribution from Transit. Ongoing maintenance of the stops, including the shelters, sign, garbages, and benches, fall to the City of Colwood after install.
Great, thank you, Chair.
All right, next, sorry, too many things here. Nope, we're good. Thank you. Moving on, Jen.
Thank you. So now what you see before you is a summary of road infrastructure works, with the exception of the Galloping Goose Overpass Bridge. These were all previously approved under last year's financial plan. And I will comment, the speed reader board, that is the reference. Brent was just commenting on the works pertaining to the speed data collector works. That's proposed there, so not a direct tie to speed reader boards. And so with respect, starting at the top, we've got the intersection improvements that are underway. This is the double lane roundabout as a result of excess works agreement between the city and the developer there. So those works are in progress. That budget there reflects a Class D estimate. So as the works progress, we do anticipate to refine these budget estimates. Next up, the intersection improvements at Suka-Machosen. We have some spend proposed for 2021. So some works did occur here last year under the umbrella of crosswalk improvements. Moving into this year, we are looking at some works followed by design and then proposed construction for 2023. The Allendale Road Works and Services. So design works have initiated and are underway. And this budget here reflects the updated estimates that we've received in conjunction with those design estimates. And we have realized an increase in the budget estimate, primarily related to one of the key drivers there is budget estimates that we utilized under last year's financial plan was consideration of above ground utilities, and this budget estimate reflects underground utilities. Lastly, the Galloping Goose Overpass Bridge, this is grant dependent. So if the city is not successful in grant financing, grant funding rather, we have not proposed an alternate funding source for these infrastructure works.
Excellent. We have Councillor Parkinson and then Councillor Jansen.
The Allendale roadworks seem to have got a lot more expensive. I think my recollection was it was a $4 million project with some kick in from the developer. Is this 6.2? Is this net of developer contributions, or developer contributions will be part of that? And really, like, what should we do here with a project that seems to have jumped in cost quite substantially?
I see Brent.
Thank you very much. Through the chair to Councillor Parkinson, fully acknowledging that the costs have jumped substantially. The cost of hydro was one of those factors that has surprised us quite significantly. And we are working with the developer in terms of finalizing the numbers of our cost apportionment with that party. He has committed earlier on to maintaining his represented percentage, as he spoke to previously, and we will be moving into more detailed cost factors. But there's, I pause because I think that the truth will be found when we're actually out to tender, which we're expecting to be inside the next 2 months, to ensure that the works underground can be delivered. And we fully planned to reduce the scope of those works to fit the budget as allowed, provided that we meet the minimum servicing intent of the obligation that has been spoken of with council prior to this date. Hope that answers your question.
Councillor Parkinson?
Okay, so reduce the scope of work to the budget allowed. Does that mean that if we approve the financial plan as present, the budget allowed is 6.2 million, and if we change that back to the 4 million, that's the budget allowed? How do we rationalize what budget we should allow? I guess is a question.
That's through the chair to Councillor Parkinson. That's exactly the question that staff have been wrangling with this dramatic increase in costs. The costs that have come to bear are from more recent, up-to-date, and as Jen pointed out, more specific detailed drawings than were received previously. I would, making a personal recommendation, I would say provide the budget as enabled within the scope of a potential tax increase of consideration for council. And if that happens to be less than the budget amount here, we will just peel back the works and services as necessary to make sure that the servicing intent of the covenants is firstly met. And so that obligation to the land is delivered firstly, and then we can speak further to council once we have ratification of the budget, actual tender results, and are speaking with known values as opposed to class D, C, or B estimates.
Excellent.
Should we do some kind of value engineering exercise or something, some independent stuff here? I mean, again, I don't certainly have the knowledge to say, not 6.2 million, 4 million, or 5 million, or 3 million, or something like that. I mean, so it sounds like you're asking that we set a budget and then you will adjust the scope to fit. And I guess I don't know how to do that. And yet I think, what would the city of Victoria have done with the Johnson Street Bridge if they had known ahead of time what was happening with cost escalation? So I just wonder if how seriously we should take this. This is a pretty significant jump And I don't think there's any of the drainage works included in this, is there? So it's not the end of the spend.
So the city has undertaken 3 separate valuations on this by 3 separate engineering consultants insofar, all stamped and all certified, that have taken us to this value. So I would suggest that those consultants don't seem to be able to ratify it. And as I've indicated, the costs from hydro are massive. And so I don't propose that council speak outside of their comfort zone, but I will mention the obligations of the covenant, which are to serve the lands to the standard. If the covenant is not met in regards to the ultimate objectives of council, provided that the lands are serviced, the covenant conditions just remain in place as not being satisfied. I'd almost love assistance from Robert, Earl, or Jen in more addressing your questions, Stuart. Or sorry, Councillor Parkinson, to say we've done a tremendous amount of work here.
Sure. Mr. Earl, please.
Thank you, Chair Day, and through to Councillor Parkinson. To echo Mr. Molnar's comments, when this project first came forward last year, 2 independent estimates were used to create the original budget that was ultimately passed by council. And that budget also informed the scoping discussion that council had, where you directed us on the nature of the scope. Since that time, a new estimate is before us. Part of that new estimate, $1 million of the substantive change relates to putting the electrical service underground rather than putting it underground rather than overhead. And so one of the options is we could potentially revisit that part of the scope in order to bring the project costs back closer to what our original estimate was. And that estimate did indeed inform council's decisions relative to scope of work. When we did get this third estimate, which this one was, which was substantially different from the first 2, that did cause alarm bells to go off here at City Hall. And we immediately took other projects that we were working on. And I'll use the DCC project as an example, where we were near ready to go, but this caused us to want to double check our capacities to bring good information into chambers and to assure ourselves that the teams that we're hiring to provide us with cost estimates were providing good value, such that we could inform council of that value, and then council could use that to make decisions. And so with the example of the DCCs, we halted that project and we went to a second consultant. And in that instance, we were much more pleased to discover the second cost estimate there came within 5% or less than 5% of the first cost estimate. And so to circle back, is using 2 independent estimates to bring the original budget to council best practice, from administration's perspective, it is. Are we disappointed when a project later on, either through scoping or through market changes, comes with a budget that's different? Absolutely, we are. We are more than prepared to work with council to bring this budget number down if we've reached a comfort level that's discomfortable in terms of what value it might provide, and or change the scope. And we're certainly will work at your direction. That said, this is the number that we most recently have in an estimate. And so that's why it's formed part of this budget tonight.
Okay.
And if I may I jump in just to confirm in response to Councillor Parkinson, this $6.2 million, which does of course include contingency. The city's budget has that included at 35%. And so this is the full value of the works. From a financial plan perspective, we're then recognizing the developer's contribution as a funding source towards this. So the 6.2 million is not indicative of the city's direct funding responsibility. It is the budget for the infrastructure project as defined.
Excellent. Thanks, Jen, for straightening us out. Councillor Parkinson, did you get your answer?
Yeah, I got very good answers from both Mr. Molnar and Mr. Earl. I would like to stress, though, that getting getting estimates that are consistent is valuable, but it's a little different than, you give the same set of plans to a number of contractors or engineers, and they price them all about the same. But it's a little different from, value engineering stepping back and saying, where are we spending the money and is it worth it? And then that sort of sounds like maybe the above ground versus below ground electrical utilities would be a question to be asked. Maybe there's other similar type questions that could and should be asked before we settle on a budget for this project, because again, I know I think it's largely paid for out of DCC monies, but even so, those monies are given to the city. I think we have a responsibility to use them wisely and efficiently. And this may in fact be the best way, but and I'll leave it to the rest of council whether they believe there's concerns, or whether we should adjust the budget, or whether we should just get it done to the full extent as proposed.
Thanks, Councillor Parkinson. Next, I have Councillor Kobayashi.
Thank you very much, Chair Dave. Yeah, I feel exactly the same as Councillor Parkinson. When I saw that number, I did remember that 4 point something or rather million, and I thought, well, maybe I missed a council meeting. I thought, well, I don't think I did. But this is shades of, of what I read would happen in Prince George, where it was a parkade in that case, and the costs escalated. I guess, if nothing was said, I guess that number, 6.2 million, we would have just bypassed it and said, yeah, and someone would have said, hey, that's, you guys approved this, but that's not what was approved. So I just want to reinforce what Councillor Parkinson said. I don't like how that was done here. It was, I feel, you can't tell me how I don't feel, but I just feel a little bit deceived on this. I don't know. I felt really uncomfortable. I actually felt uncomfortable. So I'm just going to say that right now and shut up. But I do think, and if it is an all up cost, then maybe we should break this down to sort of say this is our portion and this is the developer's portion. I don't know. But right now, the way I read this is something we previously approved at 6.2 million. That's how it reads to me. Thank you.
Mr. Earl. I'm not sure if you wanted to speak or if that was just your hand still up from before.
That was from before. I will lower my hand.
Okay, no problem. Councillor Baxter. Mr. Unmute.
Thank you. It seems to me the first decision we should make is to leave the hydro above ground. I can't see in this location why the city would want to spend $1 million to put the hydro underground. And if anybody has a good reason why we should do that, I'd love to hear it. And generally, I'm all in favor of putting hydro underground, but I cannot see that is worth it to the city in this location. And given that, if you like, at the beginning of this evening, we didn't know about the undergrounding, and now we do. I wonder, well, I would like to move actually that we receive a sort of more detail on exactly what is being built at this intersection, because it would allow us to discuss the budget more intelligently than we can do right now.
Okay, that's a motion. I have Mayor Martin and Mr. Molnar's hand up. And what I'm going to do is lower everybody's hands and just check in. Is anyone opposed to Councillor Baxter's proposed motion that we get more detail presented on this? Mayor Martin, are you opposed?
No, I'm wishing to discuss
Okay.
the motion.
All right, let's
So,
just.
yeah, so I would actually like to have staff comment before we have a vote on that, because staff may actually already have a plan. So I don't know if this motion's even in order until I hear what staff have to say.
Thank you.
Point of parliamentary order, that motion is definitely in order, and so is any objection to it.
I agree. Your motion is in order. I think your motion may have more success, though, if we hear from staff first, and then I will call the question. Councillor Jansen, I see that you have your hand up. Do you wish to contribute now, or can we go to staff and I'll come back to you?
Oh, that's go to staff.
Thank you. Mr. Molnar.
Thank you. This gives me an opportunity to talk about scope, just so before we start going into the details, we can certainly do such. So we can recirculate the scope report and exercise and resolution that was considered previously by council, but to grossly summarize it, and I'm prepared to talk about any sort of details that you'd like. Veterans Memorial Parkway is extending as underground service to the point of the intersection, extending through the intersection with Allendale and then going back overhead so it can carry on down Veterans Memorial Parkway through an overhead mechanism. So it is not extending through the intersections overhead, it's underground through the intersection. It also carries on underground through Allendale. We could also, electrical is being, streetlights are installed, or planning to be installed. Signalization is planning to install, sidewalks are planning to be installed to the limits of the scope. I feel, however, that we should be able to provide that quick summary as well as put the context of the resolution as considered by council in front of you so that you've got it, as well as the scoping, which is the scoping exercise, so you can see what went out to tender and understand that, so you can consider that in the context of what is potential to eliminate or not. If that's acceptable, we will prepare for that for the next meeting.
Excellent. Thank you. And I will go back to Mayor Martin. Anything else?
Sorry, so I'll speak, but after you call the question on the motion.
Okay. Councillor Jansen, did you wish to discuss this motion?
Yes, thank you. Two things for Brent. I mean, we talked about this being like the stormwater apex for the entire community here, and is there? I take it these are smart people, but I mean, if this is where all the water is going, why are we pushing electrical underground? That's one point. And the next is, would it be awkward if we were not to continue with underground servicing? Like, would it be unusual as far as fit and finish go if we weren't consistent with what the other contractors are doing with the servicing?
Through the chair to Councillor Jensen, our bylaw considers, even in its 1995 state, the extension of electrical services as the main to be extended in an underground format. Council has the full provision to waive that consideration of their own bylaw or not. In regards to it going underground, different location than the deep part of where the water is flowing through the lands. Staff are right now working with the consultant about streetlight spacing. Streetlights are like the physical lights that light the roadway are very expensive. We're working with our electrical consultant to shift them out and better bring efficiency, or what we perceive to be efficiency, to increase the spacing a little bit. And again, details would come forward. In regards to, I think, the nature of the question, which is how far are we down that line? In order to meet meaning how far are we in time? In order to meet the October deliverable, which was clear at the onset of the scoping exercise, staff received the scoping exercise as considered by council and immediately commenced the RFP process and the award, and then commenced work immediately in order to meet the deadlines as imposed to deliver the works and services for the developer's intent of October, which we've discussed in that meeting. There is a $500,000 deposit with BC Hydro, as well as 6 months of work with BC Hydro, their consultant, a subcontractor, and an engineering company. So there are sunk costs that are non-recoverable. However, scope change at the delivery of construction doesn't amend the drawings as delivered by the consultant. So we can simply delete that portion with the intention to add it later on at some future years considered by council. Council may also wish to have certain aspects removed from the drawing. For example, sidewalk down Veterans Memorial Parkway doesn't have to be built, but sidewalks are part of council's goal of delivery. Sewer main doesn't have to be extended the whole way. However, that's also what staff have heard as being part of a deliverable as requested by council. And this project is hoping to deliver those network services that have been on the radar for several years. However, it is council's choice to eliminate those. And that's what we propose. Certain aspects such as curbing also doesn't need to be necessary, in which case roadside drainage doesn't need to be necessary. So the works to deliver an opening door factor are about the underground, sewer, water, and drain. All the other works are a factor of budget consideration, and afterwards on meeting the context of the discussion. And those would form part of what we bring back to council at the following meeting for their itemized review of their previous scope consideration. Thank you.
Thanks. And Brent, is that one of those famous Class D estimates, or are we bang on the money there?
So our first estimate was Class D. Our second estimate was Class C, and our qualifying estimate for the DCC program, our third estimate, maintained Class C as well. We believe that there's certain efficiencies in the market right now. We've seen a little bit of factor. The Veterans Memorial Parkway at Latoria intersection is going to go to tender inside the next month. So we'll be able to qualify those costs against the assumptions, which will bring better force and effect to this as well. And so we're sitting at the highest grade almost right now, which is Class C, based upon the deliverables as shown from the scoping exercise.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So I'm coming back to Councillor Baxter, and I do apologize. I know you duly made a motion, and we've kind of gotten a little sidetracked, and the motion was that more information be brought back to the next meeting. Councillor Baxter.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out to everybody the oddity of this conversation, which is not the fault of anybody taking part. Normally, in a municipality, these roads would be built by the developer's entire cost, including any underground services, etc. And so normally municipal staff and municipal council wouldn't be involved in this issue. But unfortunately, there's an agreement from times past that puts at least some of the cost in the municipality's hands. And that's why we've ended up having this conversation, which I imagine is not exactly like any that any of staff have had before. I could be wrong.
Great. So your motion stands, and I'm going to lower all hands, and I'm looking for those in opposition to receiving more information on this for our next meeting. Is there anyone opposed? Seeing none, that is carried. We will get more information on that for our next meeting. Mayor Martin, did you wish to speak?
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I won't spend a lot of time because clearly we're going to need to discuss this further in a separate meeting. My first reaction, though, is it is unfortunate that council wasn't made aware of the change in the dollar amount and that, and I think that is an unfortunate thing. But I also understand, as Councillor Baxter has just explained, that there is a responsibility and we have to meet that responsibility. And I have a lot of faith in our staff and the work that they're doing to attempt to meet that responsibility. And I feel comfortable if staff come back and say, listen, the scope has got us to a position where we need to look and be realistic, that we need to be thinking at the 6 million level rather than the 4, that we will need to look at that. But as we have now said, we'll be able to look at it in a little more detail moving forward. So, but I do appreciate the work that staff have also put in. I think that this is not, it doesn't go unnoticed that there's been a lot of effort on that side. So thank you, Chair.
Welcome. Okay, the time is 9:13. I was hoping to wrap us up somewhat early tonight, but I would like to check in with Jen to see where might be a natural break for us.
I think right now is a natural break. I had anticipated that this would take us to the approximate 3-hour mark. And so if this works for committee, what I've got before is a proposal to continue with the capital program discussion. We'll return with the detail as directed on Allendale. We also have scheduled our policing operating budget presentation. And then we'll be looking for any recommended changes at the next meeting, which is Tuesday, March 16th.
Okay, I will recognize Councillor Kobayashi.
Thank you very much, Chair Day. I just want to compliment you, Jen, and how you laid out the capital program. I found it so easy to follow. You know what strategy it's going to, it's meeting, you know the approximate cost. I think it was laid out so well. I've never seen anything like it. And I just wanted to compliment you on that. And I was just going to ask one other thing, that the one extra column, which would be extremely useful to me, I don't know how my fellow councillors feel about it, is where the money's coming from. Like, where is it being, what particular reserve fund it comes from, or which federal program or DCCs or whatever. That would be phenomenal in that. So if you had an extra column. Anyways, just a point, but phenomenal. And thank you very much, Jen.
Certainly, thank you. And that's a testament to the team. It's not just me that puts together this deliverable, but we can absolutely add that information and certainly highlight for anything previously approved clearly on the text where there's been changes to scope or budget.
Okay, thank you very much, Jen.
Okay, any last questions from anyone before I look for a motion to adjourn for tonight? Oh, I see a hand from Councillor Johnson.
I'll move adjournment, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. We are adjourned at 9:16 p.m. We will reconvene. Our next meeting is March 16th, as you can see on the screen. Thank you all for your hard work, whether you're reviewing or creating, much appreciated.
Night
Good night.
all.